Hi everyone. Before we begin this podcast, I would like to introduce you to the ZILHive grants program. We have set aside a pool of $5 million to help you build your project on Zilliqa and contribute to our ecosystem. We have four different tracks that you can apply for, which are the infrastructure, innovation, technical research, and market research. These tracks cater to everyone from developers to industry professionals. Till date, we have funded over 80 projects from more than 22 different countries, and some have continued to scale to become core partners in our ecosystem. If you wish to apply for a grant but you do not have a project idea in mind yet, we have a mission board on the website where you can choose from a list of ready to go project ideas to work on. You can receive up to $15,000 in grant funding depending on the project and track you apply for. On top of that, you will also be able to get technical advice from the Zilliqa team as you work on the project. More details about the grant program can found in the link below. Let's start the podcast now. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Zilliqa podcast. Today I have Muneeb with me. Muneeb is the co-founder of Blockstack. Blockstack is an open source effort to design a network with the security of Bitcoin and the expressivity required for developing decentralized applications. Today, we are going to talk to him more about his journey, building Blockstack, and what exciting things they have in store in the near future. So, hi, Muneeb, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
So, can you start off by talking about your blog backstory? I used to watch Blockstack videos when I was getting into crypto, early in 2016, 17, I guess, when you used to organize these conferences in which Naval, Balaji, all these people used to come. So yeah, I have been following your story for some time as well, but still would love to hear more. I guess you have a research background and then you became an entrepreneur. So how did that come about?
Yeah, so I think I'm a computer scientist at heart. I've been doing research in distributed systems for around 15 years now. Most recently, I was at Princeton where I was finishing my PhD, where the project really started, right? So the project got its roots in the computer science department at Princeton. Most of the early team members, the scientists, they are from there, along with some of the professors as well, who are co-authors on the technical papers. And the origination of the project is more around trying to design a more secure next generation internet architecture. But the journey led us to blockchains and Bitcoin. And over time, so I guess I started looking into blockchains like around 2013. Bitcoin was like $90 then the first Bitcoin that I bought. Feels like a long time ago now. And I think in many ways, the heart of the issues that we were working on, they're even more relevant right now. Whereas I think the fundamental thing is that Bitcoin uh, is meant to be a store of value. Like it's meant to be a protocol that is very stable, very secure, doesn't change a lot. But at the same time, people want to build apps and smart contracts as well, right? And famously, Vitalik kind of like tried doing that on Bitcoin and then went off and started Ethereum. And even if you look at Ethereum or ETH 2.0 or all these new projects that are coming, they're effectively still trying to solve the same problem. They're basically saying, how can we build apps and smart contracts in a scalable way on blockchains? And I think the approach that we're taking is a little bit different. I think we're more in the Bitcoin camp. We think that the security of Bitcoin or even the capital that is locked up on Bitcoin, they're extremely valuable. And Bitcoin has network effects. So Bitcoin might end up winning as money, right? Which is a huge thing. And we've been trying to crack that holy grail of, can you actually enable smart contracts or apps directly on Bitcoin? So that's kind of like the gist of the work, and then we can go into the details where we first design a somewhat limited blockchain Stacks 1.0 that works directly on top of Bitcoin, but Stacks 2.0 is our main design, which has been in R&D for the last couple of years, where we are releasing a full kind of like smart contract language called Clarity. And the design that we ended up with is almost like people can visualize two blockchains that natively connect to each other, right? So our Stacks blockchain connects with Bitcoin and enable smart contracts around Bitcoin, enable apps around Bitcoin.
Yeah, gotcha. So, as you mentioned that there's a lot of capital that is locked in Bitcoin. I think that's yeah, around 60% of the market cap is with Bitcoin or something. So, um, and we have now DeFi applications that are coming in Ethereum, and the main value proposition, like many other chains, are struggling to get basically the value of Ethereum, because all this capital is locked in Ethereum, and it's difficult to have DeFi applications when there isn't capital. So I guess you don't suffer from this problem, at least. So in terms of DeFi, what interesting things are happening? Are you planning to have some of the Bitcoin hodlers try out some DeFi applications on Stacks?
Yeah, so I think if you go back a couple of years, I think a lot of people have been excited about. Basically, there are two tracks in this next internet. One is the crypto economy, which people call DeFi or open finance. There are different names for it. And the other is these decentralized applications. And again, people have different names like Web3 or so on. But there are effectively two tracks. One is targeting the existing financial institutions, and the other is targeting the existing big tech, like your companies like Facebook and Google. And I think over the last couple of years, it was unclear which one of these is going to happen first. But over the last 6 months or a year, there are more signs now that the financial applications are happening faster because the infrastructure is there, or the business model or some of these potential returns that people can directly get access to are there. Doesn't mean that the second track is not going to happen. It's just that one seems to be happening earlier than the other. So I do think that over the next year or so, we'll see more of these financial products kind of like being built by developers. And I think you're absolutely right that the $200 billion of passive capital that is sitting on Bitcoin is a really big resource, right? People are actually trying to tokenize Bitcoin and move it to Ethereum. And even those numbers are becoming significant. I think Wrap BTC has crossed $1 billion in market cap. And that's, now imagine that when you're doing that, you're effectively issuing an ERC20 asset, and that is being used in Solidity contracts. And I think some people are uneasy with that, right? Because they would question the kind of like the security properties of a JavaScript-like language, or even some of the cultural norms that are there in terms of like it borders on like reckless experimentation. And I think Bitcoiners, like, they don't want to lose their Bitcoin. So I feel like the key thing to enabling, at the same time, they do want to get returns on their holdings. They don't want to sell Bitcoin, but they would be up for lending it, or they would be up for parking that money somewhere if they can get returns while taking less risk. So the approach that we have taken is that these new types of financial assets that are being defined, they are actually anchoring back into Bitcoin, right? So the source of truth remains Bitcoin, even if it's a new asset. Let's say I create some sort of a financial product, it's a new crypto asset. The ownership of that asset is eventually defined in Bitcoin, which I think is important, because it's not that in the case of Ethereum Classic that there is some deep reorg and now you don't know what is the state of the blockchain. The Bitcoin remains the source of truth. Secondly, our smart contract language, we did around 2+ years of work into this. The smart contract language is designed in a way that there are mathematical proofs for correctness. So even before running a program, you can actually know for certain what the program can and cannot do, which I think is very important, which is something that is completely missing from the mainstream DeFi products that we're seeing on Ethereum. I know that most of the newer projects, they're actually more in this camp, and I'm pretty sure Zilliqa as well has been thinking along similar lines.
Yeah, Zilliqa's Scylla language was, I think, quite, along. We have the same thought process. It's very difficult to write buggy code. It's actually function programming. There's no loops and stuff. So yeah, I guess yeah, we do agree on those aspects, and even I think projects like Near are using Rust, or and the newer projects are definitely using more type safe programming languages. Um, in terms of how would actually DeFi work on Blockstack if people want to, if we can dig a bit deeper on this, can you go in that direction?
Yeah, so I think there are two aspects. One is the language itself. So Clarity is our main language. It is a functional language, and it might be restrictive in certain ways, like like if you don't have loops and stuff like that. But I think it's still very expressive, like in the sense that most programs that you want to write, you should be able to write them. Just that you get better security properties. So effectively it's harder for developers to hurt themselves. Like that's the mental model over there. There are already programs, like I can give an example. There's a smart contract called Swapper. It's a automated market maker. But the interesting thing there is that you can have proofs of correctness, that the exchange will only kind of like allow trades that meet a certain criteria, or even you can have proofs of liquidity, that trades would only happen if these conditions on liquidity are met. But they're more like mathematical proofs, that there's no way that any other condition can happen. So that's a property of the language and the way the blockchain is designed to work with the language. But then the more interesting part, I think, is the native connection to Bitcoin. And one way to think about that is that there's a native bridge between the Stacks chain and the Bitcoin chain. If you go a little bit deeper, what's happening is that the Stacks miners actually see both the Bitcoin chain and the Stacks chain. And our consensus algorithm runs between the two chains. It actually looks at state between the two chains to arrive on consensus, which means that these Clarity contracts actually have visibility into Bitcoin. If there's a state chain on Bitcoin, these contracts know about it, right? So that allows the developers to start writing. I'll give you a very simple example. Let's say you want to write a program that says that if this particular Bitcoin address receives more than $5, some logic will trigger on the Stacks chain, right? So that is native. And I think that's very powerful, because now developers can start writing logic around actions that are happening on the Bitcoin chain.
Interesting. So for Stacks, you have, I think what I read was you have Stacks 2.0 that is coming. I did read the white paper and try to understand the architecture, but can you, still explain like what's up with that? And in terms of like security of the Stacks chain, when you compare it to Bitcoin, how does that compare to Bitcoin's like chain security? Like, is it easy to say if someone to do like a miners to do double spend or something? Like how difficult is it for miners to do double spend on Stacks?
Yeah, so I think the main new consensus algorithm that we came up with, I think the draft came out in February of this year. So it's called proof of transfer, POX. So POX consensus is the main algorithm, and what that really does is the core idea is that instead of like having people to buy ASICs and do proof of work, we want to use Bitcoin as proof of computation, right? So Bitcoin has already been produced through doing proof of work. Can you just use the Bitcoin that is produced as proof of computation and effectively let miners express their cost of mining in Bitcoin, right? So Bitcoin miners are expressing their cost in electricity or the hardware that they've bought, and that's their cost. And they would mine if it's profitable for them to mine. And on our proof of transfer, they're expressing the cost in Bitcoin. They're bidding in Bitcoin, and there is a verifiable random function that can select you as a miner. So you would mine only if it's profitable for you to mine, and because the value of the block, because the block has transaction fees, it has Clarity contract fees, it has the newly minted STX. If the value of the block is actually more than what you're spending in Bitcoin, right? But that actually has a very interesting model, because what it says is that these new blockchains can actually share in the security of Bitcoin instead of starting their own proof of work separate networks. And I was able to connect all of this back to Satoshi Nakamoto, who had a similar vision, right? So there are quotes of Satoshi on different forums where he's talking about having these use cases. He was actually very excited about these use cases, like decentralized DNS or other types of networks, but he wanted these separate blockchains to actually share in the compute power of Bitcoin, right? So that I think this actually goes pretty deep in the crypto industry, because one of the reasons I think there is so much of a tribal culture is that let's take Bitcoin versus Ethereum, right? At some level, if Ethereum is gaining traction, Bitcoiners would feel that they're losing out on some value, right? And if that was not the case, if Ethereum was becoming stronger, Bitcoin was also becoming stronger because they had some sort of a shared resource or shared value set. I actually think that that would change the behavior of people as well. So I think this is effectively what we are doing. We're not only just bringing smart contracts to Bitcoin, we're actually trying to solve a fundamental issue where you cannot have all sorts of applications on Bitcoin. The Bitcoin chain cannot take it, neither from a scalability point of view, nor from a smart contract logic point of view. But we do want to share with the Bitcoin community that if the Stacks chain actually grows, that's good for Bitcoin, right? Because there's more demand for Bitcoin for mining, right? And then interestingly, our Stacks holders, when they participate in consensus, they're actually earning Bitcoin, right? So it is helping with the adoption of Bitcoin as well, because every Stacks holder is, if they're participating in consensus, is also a Bitcoiner because they're earning Bitcoin rewards there, right? So we are trying to align incentives from a community perspective and economic perspective as well, and not just from a technical perspective.
Okay, gotcha. So you had you guys have a in 2017-18, I remember, had a very interesting program in which you were rewarding top developers, right? Top Dapps. I think it was app.co. I don't remember the name right now, but yeah. So how has your journey, like getting people to build applications on Blockstack, how has that been? Because what we have also seen, it's difficult to bootstrap developer community. You need to developer tooling. It's a network effect as well, that you need, if like more developers there are, they'll build tools so that other developers also, their life also gets easier. So yeah, what sort of interesting steps have you taken to get people to develop on Blockstack?
Yep. So I think we ran, so the program is called App Mining, and app.co is the correct website. It still lists kind of like the top applications there. I think most of the 400 applications we got in the last year and a half, I think a large part of that goes to the App Mining program. We saw a lot of interest from developers. They were participating in it, and over time we started noticing that as the program was growing, because the key thing we were trying to do is we given it's a decentralized system, and given we were trying to operate at a much bigger scale, we wanted to automate it as much as possible, right? Instead of like imagine like Y Combinator, where there are 7, 8 partners, they review every application and they kind of like accept or reject things. We wanted to automate that. We were effectively saying that if there are a bunch of like different types of reviewers, for example, there were reviewers who were giving scores on UX of apps, or you're trying to pick any other metric and you're trying to like automate the scoring of that. And I think it was working better at small scale. And then as the program started becoming bigger and more money is actually flowing through it, obviously it would get attacked, right? So people are trying to game the system. They're trying to hit the metrics without actually hitting the true purpose of it, right? Like instead of building like high quality applications, I will give you an example that a single team would figure out that if I submit 5 different apps, my rewards might be higher than focusing on a single app. But that's a behavior that you don't actually want. You want people to kind of like focus on like true apps that gain widespread adoption. So we gain a lot of insight there. And actually, I'll point you to a blog post where we summarize all of the lessons. I think they were fascinating from an experiment point of view. And then we're using some of that data in the design of the App Mining 2.0 program. But App Mining 2.0, now there's an independent Stacks Foundation that has the budget for this program. And I think what they're roughly thinking right now is that they might actually make it a little bit more manual. We will go back to being more automated to more manual, and start small and try to actually seed the developers who are very enthusiastic and who would just work on this anyway, and not people who are primarily incentivized by the rewards and they're building it only because they're getting some rewards.
Okay, gotcha. So in terms of applications on Blockstack, can you talk about, you talked about Swapper, I think, for DeFi, and I think there's also Flexer that I saw, and there are a couple of others on the website that I saw, but any like interesting applications you'd like to shout out to that people can try out and see what's happening in the Blockstack ecosystem?
Yeah, I'm happy to share some of them. I think one of the apps is called Pravica. So it's pravica.io. And Pravica, it's a really great team out of Egypt. And they have built out a full decentralized, video conferencing. So imagine like a Zoom alternative plus a decentralized chat application. And they're very ambitious. They actually have a full email type communication platform around it as well. So almost imagine like in Gmail, you can send an email, you can chat with people, or you can do a video call. You can do all of this in a fully decentralized manner, built on top of Blockstack. So that's definitely an app people should go check out. There are also interesting applications like there's Block Survey. So again, privacy focused, security focused, survey type applications. And what I like about these teams is they're actually going for enterprise use cases. They're trying to get like real revenue out of the customers, because I feel like that's at the heart of like these applications, where instead of like trying to make money from people's data, which is fundamentally what happens with most of the current cloud-based applications, they're focusing on security and privacy and then going after real business use cases. And there are other applications like Sigil, which is a blogging platform. People can go and try that out. But I would say that if there's one thing the audience can remember, it would be just to go to app.co. It's very easy to remember, and you can have a list of like all these applications there.
Cool. So you have your in the Blockstack, like there's 4 things in your stack, right? You have Bitcoin, then you have stacks, then you have the storage and the authentication layer, and then you have the final applications, I guess. So can you talk about the storage and I think Gaia and the couple of others? So these applications that you mentioned, I suppose they will be using those like the full stack for authentication and storage and stuff.
Yeah. So I think our software stack, if we just walk through it, so obviously there's Bitcoin, and we view Bitcoin as a source of truth, as a settlement layer, but also as the reserve currency, right? So we're not trying to be money. We're not trying to be sometimes there are arguments between Ethereum and Bitcoin where people saying ETH is money. We are explicitly not trying to be money, right? Bitcoin is the money in the stack. And then you have the Stacks blockchain, especially the Stacks 2.0 blockchain that has the smart contracts. And STX gets consumed as fuel for effectively the smart contracts. Yes, there are transaction fees and all these other use cases as well, but effectively you're paying for compute. So it's a little bit like instead of AWS, where you're paying Amazon, you're purchasing the STX cryptocurrency and you're paying it for the computations that Clarity contracts for you, right? And then the way we scale is that first, thousands of transactions on the Stacks chain only result in a single hash on Bitcoin. So we effectively settle on Bitcoin in terms of on-chain transactions. But then we realize that most of this data cannot be on-chain anyway, right? So we our storage is off chain. Only the pointers for storage will be. I can just pause for a minute. Yeah. So I think the Stacks blockchain layer is people should think of that as the smart contracts layer, really, on Bitcoin, and we deal with scalability where thousands of transactions on Stacks would result in a single hash on Bitcoin, and Stacks is the STX, the cryptocurrency, is the fuel for these smart contracts. So instead of developers kind of like paying Amazon, they're buying this cryptocurrency and they're paying for the computations that these Clarity contracts are doing. But we fully realize that you cannot do everything on chain, and storage is off chain, right? So only pointers for storage are on the Stacks blockchain. And the way we think about storage is Gaia, that you mentioned, is a wide area file system. So it's like an encrypted wide area file system. You can mount any underlying storage, and I think this is something that we will be focusing more on. Right now, we basically have drivers for Google Drive or Dropbox or these types of storage providers, but these underlying storage providers could also be things like Filecoin or Skynet and these other networks, because Gaia is effectively just a wide area encrypted file system, right? So users are supposed to kind of like pay for the storage, right? And the apps are writing data with the users. So in some ways, at a high level, the storage model is a little bit like the desktops world, where the apps were running locally and they were writing data on users' hard drives, and then users were responsible for backing up that data. What we have done is that those logical hard drives are actually cloud-based, but users are supposed to pay for the storage, right? So you can back up your data on multiple logical cloud-based drives, but they're fully encrypted and they're fully under the control of the user. That's the vision.
Okay. You also have a naming service as well, right? So can you talk about that as well?
Yeah, so I think the way to think about this is whichever protocol or platform ends up winning, there are certain key features that they will end up developing, right? Like, for example, naming service is kind of like you need a way to easily discover apps and people on the network. And for the internet, we got the DNS type of a system. Even if you look at current blockchains, like Ethereum end up implementing ENS, there's Handshake, and there are all these other protocols. So I think I almost think of this as these protocols would start having feature parity, or at least the top ones, with some key fundamental differences. And I think there is actually space for multiple protocols in this ecosystem. Like, we're still in the early innings, and for us, we felt the need for a naming system as well, and we call it BNS. And over there, our approach is a little bit different in the sense that we let developers start kind of like new namespaces. Namespaces are like your TLDs, right? So if someone wants to start a .com or a .net or .org, developers can start it, but they get to program the capabilities of that TLD. That what should be the price of the name, how frequently would they expire, is this a TLD where anyone can register, or is it limited to certain parties? So the developers get to kind of like pick what they want to do, and it's all about kind of like giving developers the power to do these things. So on the Stacks 2.0 chain, the naming system would effectively be another Clarity smart contract. So it's a smart contract that's running, and developers can interact with it.
Okay, gotcha. So you did talk about you see these protocols coexisting. So in terms of current, how do you look at the different L1s right now? So in terms of how they'll survive, and maybe in the future, how would people use these L1s? Do you feel that there will be, say, 10, 20 L1s that will survive. Maybe they have some different special use cases, or some people find, or it would be that, okay, some people find that these L1s are more valuable for them. And um, yeah, how do you look at that?
Yeah, so I think crypto industry changes very rapidly, so these models evolve. And but I can give you like uh, what my latest thinking is. I think maybe there's room for like 5 to 10 successful chains out there for multiple reasons, right? One is pure scalability, in the sense that we are noticing this on Ethereum right now, where Ethereum gas fees are skyrocketing, and some apps are actually transferring out to other chains, right? Either they're transferring out to existing blockchains, like an example would be, I think the Kin token was on Ethereum and moved to Algorand or something like that, or things are moving to the Binance chain. Similar, or there are apps that got really famous and they ended up building their own blockchains, like the CryptoKitties team ended up building Flow. Uh, and one other interesting kind of like trend to watch out for is this concept of bridges. So a lot of these projects are actually building these bridges now. So Stacks has a native bridge with Bitcoin, which is very interesting, and it's kind of like hard to build a bridge to Bitcoin. But if people are building bridges to Stacks, they also have a native bridge to Bitcoin, right? And it's entirely possible that some sort of a cluster emerges where there are certain blockchains that either specialize in certain use cases, right, or they specialize in certain developer tools and have communities of developers around them. So I think one way to model this is, you know, database industries would appear to be a very saturated market. Yet every couple of years, a new type of database comes in and then captures a large market share, because it's just like such a large opportunity that there is space for these new types of databases to come in and actually have developer traction. So if you look at these chains, you would notice that their smart contracts tend to be like in different dialects, or their tooling for developers would look different, and engineers have their own preferences, right? So it's entirely possible that people who like Rust programming go to a certain chain, people who are more in the Bitcoin camp, or who are more in the functional programming camp, and they're building things in one way. But I think eventually, I do think at some point we will see some consolidation as well. And I think that's actually a big part of our thesis, where even if today it appears that more apps are being built on Ethereum, if I was taking the bet that what would end up being future money, like Bitcoin has 1,000x better chance than Ethereum being bad, right? So if you want to build anything with money, I would rather bring smart contracts to Bitcoin rather than hoping that Ethereum would start getting the status of money in the future, right? So, and people can make their bets in different ways, and that's kind of like the beauty of this ecosystem where so much experimentation is happening.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting framework to think about. Yeah, to think about L1s. In to wrap this off, I'd just like to ask you how people can get involved. How, like developers specifically, do you have interesting grant programs? Yeah, how can people get involved in the Blockstack ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think first thing I would like to call out is Stacks 2.0 is our master design. It's actually the main thing that we've been working on. In some ways, like because we released Stacks 1.0, which was like more limited, people don't fully realize that 2.0 is the main thing, right? Like that's the real blockchain that's coming online, and that we've been doing all of the R&D work on, the Clarity language, the consensus algorithm. Mining actually starts for the first time with the release of 2.0. And so that's effectively the biggest launch from the project in our history. So I would definitely watch out for that. It's in roughly 2 months or so. And then we obviously have a bunch of grants on for our testnet. So our testnet is live, mining. We have this concept of stacking, where people can lock up their STX to earn Bitcoin rewards. So that is live on the testnet. And then the biggest thing is Clarity smart contracts, right? So we've taken a lot of care in designing this new programming language. We ended up collaborating with Algorand as well on the language. And if people are interested in kind of like a language that is predictable, where they can have proofs of correctness, or where they can actually program logic around Bitcoin, I think they should like really try out the Clarity language, which is available on testnet and going on mainnet in roughly 2 months or so.
Cool.
And in terms of web properties, I am at Muneeb on Twitter, so it's Muneeb, and Blockstack is at Blockstack on Twitter and blockstack.org.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Muneeb, for taking the time out. I guess, the community would love to know more about Blockstack, and we'd love to see if we can somehow collaborate as well in the future.
Yep, that'd be great. I'll love to follow up, and thanks so much for having me.